Manu'a, my name is Opetai Taliai, Tongan born, now living in New Zealand. I am an academic researcher, currently working on a book, which is a rewriting of Tongan history. As you can see from the title of my talk, it's Re-examining Tongan history. I want to talk first about two problems that I experienced in my work on Tongan history, just to share with you about my main concern here regarding my work. The first problem is a type of history. Biographical history goes back to a French critic of the 19th century by the name Charles-Augustin Sainte-Beuve, who, with his classical statement of "by their fruits ye shall know them," stated that biographical history is a passionate piece of autobiography, a personal account of one's own life, which is a statement that I found very appropriate in my reading of Tongan history, particularly of the book written and published in 1999 by Elizabeth Wood Allen called Queen Charlotte of Tonga, where Elizabeth quoted Queen Charlotte as to say that Tongan history is what the highest chief says. That's a clear indication of a biographical kind of history that I'm referring here. And of course, this direct quote is a reference to Queen Charlotte herself as the highest chief. I want to bring in a point made by the English poet Thomas Gray, who disputed with his landscape poetry, disputed Sainte-Beuve's biographical argument by saying that it is essential to judge a literal work in quotation independently from my knowledge of the man himself. Man himself in that quotation refers to Sainte-Beuve. Thomas Gray emphasized that we, historian or critic, need to produce certain intellectual and emotional effects on a reader. Let's sum up briefly that point on biographical history. The other point that I want to mention is this problem regarding oral and written history. I am reminding here that Tongan history or Tongan way of thinking is still very much poetic. By poetic, people still think in a poetical way, even talking, rather than going straight to the point, which is the scientific characteristic of language. English is an example. Tongans tend always to go round the point. By mentioning the oral history, also reminds me of Queen Charlotte in her later book, compiled together with this English historian, Elizabeth Bott, where Queen Charlotte reiterated this biographical type of history that she is trying to emphasize. In that book of Queen Charlotte with Elizabeth Bott, she starts the book with a genealogy of herself and her family in Tonga. And goes on to say that with that genealogy, Tongan history starts from there. So she's referring here, this genealogy refers to Tuitonga Urakimata. And from this Tuitonga right down to the present is the Tongan history. She is cutting off the former part of the history of the Tuitonga before Tuitonga Urakimata by saying that all those Tuitonga before Urakimata were Samoans. Not only that, but they lived most of their life in Samoa, traveling back and forth, Samoa and Tonga. Whereas Urakimata was the first Tuitonga to stay input in Tonga, build this empire of Tuitonga Empire up to today. I'll come back to that point later on in my talk, but I want to touch on two oral traditions to illustrate my argument how important is oral history when we come to talk about Tongan history. The first tradition that I want to touch on is the beginning of Tonga, or Tala Tupuanga of Tonga. As you can see on the screen, I have summarized some notes on this tradition that Tala Kamataanga o Tonga is a story about Tangaloa. Tangaloa literally translated as the fisher god. And he was the first to make or to build a Tonga, a system in Tonga. And Tonga became a subsidiary dominion of the Manu'a, Samoa Atoa sovereignty. Now, I want to add on this information about Samoa Atoa, or the Manu'a for that. We are going back to Samoa, to the eastern part of Samoa. There is a group of islands there, 3 main islands, and that whole group of islands is called Manu'a. And Tangaloa started the Samoa Atoa in Manu'a. Samoa Atoa literally translated as all Samoa. And they were consisted of 6 main islands: Tonga, Fiji, Samoa, Tahiti, Rarotonga, and Oahu in Hawaii. Those are the islands that made up all Samoa the old Samoa Islands. And you can see that Samoa Atoa, I interpreted it as the islands that gave the Tui Manu'a the umiti, sacrifice of seafood. Tangaloa is the family name of the Tui Manu'a. And in the story of beginning, it begins with an impregnation of an eel, in Tongan, Tauia or Futuna. It set up the story with a fish eel that was impregnated, and she later gave birth to 4 sets of mixed twins. Mixed twins, the male, female, the 4 pairs. And in turn, these 4 pairs entered into a relationship, incestuous relationship, where they produced the Tangaloa family, one of them. Now, the important point that I want to touch about this from this story is the creation of the social political status of fahu in Tonga. And this story here of the beginning is about that creation of the fahu social system. Fahu is very central in Tongan society, and who is regarded as the highest rank position in Tongan society. And fahu refers to the sacred royal blood of Tangaloa, which is known in Tongan as Totoi Eiki. And it is supposed to contain within the family. And how to do that is done by incestuous, in an incestuous way. This Au'etu is said to be the first putative to Tonga, but really it's about the formality of a Tongan socio-economic system. Au'etu is, in Samoan, Asoaitu Refolasa, is a reference to the sacrifice food given to the Tui Manu'a. And Tui Manu'a in that story of Au'etu is also known as Lefolasa. And Lefolasa is associated with the appointment of the 3 main titles in the beginning of Tonga. And they are the Tui Tonga, kingship title, and the 2 advisory supporting houses, Tui Whareua and Wharewha. So together with this tradition of Au'etu and the Talaka Mata'anga that I talked about earlier before, together these 2 traditions are the foundation, set up the foundations of Tongan society that we know today. Still practiced today in Tonga, the incestuous relationship, mainly, especially in the royal family and the chief of Tonga, they intermarried one another. For the purpose of keeping the sacred blood, royal blood inside, and also the economic system of exchange goods, which I think is very important for historians to recognize in their work of writing up Tongan history. Now, I want to touch the other part of the problem that I touch on oral versus written about the Tupou family. Tupou family is the family name of Tuikanaupolu, who are the current ruler of Tonga. And the family name is Tupou. Now, the significance of the Tupou family in Tonga is the beginning of writing the history of Tonga. Tupou the first, who first introduced Tonga into Western culture by way of bringing in Christianity into Tonga, and of course the construction of the 1875 Constitution, which is a construction that subsequently abolished the Tuitonga title. And independence from Samoa Atoa happened in this time of the Tupou family. I've touched a lot about Consalote earlier on in my talk, the importance of criticism in writing history. Criticism is about the distinction between subjectivism and objectivism. That as a historian or critic, we have to be objective as opposed to being subjective, which is a main feature of biographical history that I touched on earlier on in my talk. And add on to that, my conclusion is the theme, leaping into the unknown. I think it's very important that we go back to the beginning, to oral tradition, which is the beginning. I think that's all for now, and I thank you for listening.